Hi, Lisa. Welcome to the podcast.
Krista, thank you so much for having me on. I am delighted and honored to be here.
Oh my gosh, I've been dying to talk to you about this beautiful book that you wrote. So much so that, like I just mentioned offline, we're going to be skipping over the first two questions because I really want to do this book justice because I think it's incredibly important, the work that you did. You wrote this beautiful book called The Chiron Effect, Healing Our Core Wounds Through Astrology, Empathy, and Self-Forgiveness. And it is a guide to using astrology as a diagnostic tool to identify one of 12 core wounds. So I thought where we would start is I would give you a little bit more opportunity to explain what this book is about. For people who haven't heard of a Chiron or understand astrology, maybe we can give them like a quick baseline of what all of that language is.
Sure, Krista. Thank you. And I think the place to start is my book answers the question I posed to the universe and to myself. Why is it that many of my clients are very intelligent, successful, have so much going for them, yet still are experiencing episodic anxiety and depression, or either? And why was I at that time, despite being in therapy as a client over 20 years, being a therapist for 20 years, why did I still feel some of these really deep emotions that would kind of rock my world for a bit? Like, what was missing? And I just started to listen to what the universe began to show me, and leading me to this knowledge of Chiron, Chiron. And Chiron, many of you might know, Carl Jung wrote about collective archetypes, and the wounded healer, Chiron, is one of them. And that was a reference I had from graduate school in social work. Okay, I hear you, universe, got it. But what's that really about? And as I kept researching, Chiron is actually in astronomy, a heavenly body in our solar system. Chiron is both a minor planet and a comet designated in astronomy. It has two designations, which is unique in our solar system to have two designations. And it has an odd elliptical orbit between the planets of Saturn and Uranus. And the astronomer Charles Cowell, that discovered Chiron, named it Chiron after the Greek centaur in Greek mythology, who was the founding father of the healing arts, of botany, of medicine. And when we go to the doctor nowadays and you see the staff of medicine, the two snakes intertwined on a staff, Chiron actually gave that to Asclepius, whom he tutored. So I thought this was really cool. I'm like, okay, universe, this is really cool stuff, but tell me more, show me more. And that's when I learned that Chiron is a placement in our astrological birth chart. And most all of us know our sign. Like, what's your sign, Krista?
I'm a Cancer.
You're a Cancer sun. And I'm a Gemini. And I didn't know that Chiron is a placement like your Cancer sun, like me being a Gemini. And it's different from our sun placement. It's a placement having to do with where we feel vulnerability. And it's actually on a spectrum. In the service of creating a book title that doesn't go on longer than mine does, my publisher and I decided on using the term core wounding, but that's not actually accurate for everyone. For some people that grew up feeling really loved and really good about themselves, Chiron identifies more of an ouch, like a place in your life where you occasionally might feel like ouch, versus when you've experienced more of a major trauma or loss or abandonment. That's when we see this being a placement related to more core wounding, where we feel like something might be actually wrong with us. We're in a lot of self-judgment. We're in a lot of criticism of ourselves. We might feel unlovable. We might feel like we're not good enough. And that's, Krista, where we see some really deep wounding that perpetuates and creates patterns in our adult lives that can be hard to navigate and understand. And sometimes we might just relegate ourselves that, well, this just isn't for me. And my book really seeks to help you understand that whatever you want, it is for you. Absolutely. And we might just need to learn some of the skills, like how to show up to really embody and be able to hold the vibrations of what we want, because we might need to unlearn some false beliefs about ourselves, about being unworthy or not good enough, and deeply heal through self-empathy and forgiveness those parts of ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you so much for going into that level of detail. I was also wondering too, because we all have this placement in our chart, wherever it is, I wanted to understand then, are we all in our own essence wounded healers? Like, do we all then have this capacity to heal ourselves through whatever the wounding is? And I talked to you when we met the first
Yeah.
time, like reading your book, it was astrology to me is just scary because it just feels like so not scary like really scary, but like scary just like accurate. And like the first time I had my natal chart read, I felt like somebody had just stripped me naked and seen my entire life and understood everything about me and what had happened. So but in the same way, like back to my question with the Chiron thing, like does that mean that we are all wounded healers then to some degree?
Well, first, I want to share the reason why you had that experience of such vulnerability. And this was the hugest download for me,
Mm-hmm.
almost bigger than the book that I wrote, is that it's so accurate because we wrote our birth chart. It's not
Right.
prescribed to us. We actually
Mm-hmm.
wrote it. We actually decided, and I don't remember that time before I became physical, when I was in
Yes.
non-physical. Yeah. And like decided I want to experience some of these things. And that's what's reflected in the stars and planets and such being where they were when all of us were born. But this is like a blueprint that we created. And the best news of all is related to your question of are we all wounded healers, is we all have the capacity to change and
Mm-hmm.
to learn and to grow. And for some of us that might be some healing because we have been wounded, and for others that haven't necessarily been wounded, because that's such a strong word, it might
Yes.
just be that we learn that we have choice, that we have the power and ability to direct our lives. And I think that's what our lives are about, to really learn who we really are in some more exciting and delightful ways. And that takes really some time, in my experience, to meditate, to align the energy of my emotions with what I most deeply desire before I ever take action. Because so many of us exhaust ourselves through only the action part
Yeah.
versus taking time to really be with our inner selves and nurture that. And it can create doing less and being more, if that makes sense. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's really the healing journey, the the growth journey, the personal development, the enhancements that we want to experience, is to really live into more joy.
Yeah, I can echo all of that from my own lived experience as well. I mean, I think there's like this sort of threshold where you can only self-reflect and self-contemplate all of the pain, and at some point you've got to transition into this other place where you accept. For me, having my natal chart read as well, there was that deep acceptance and understanding my life was not going to go any other way. There was no way it was going to go any other way, and being able to understand that that wasn't a negative thing. It was like a
Right.
positive thing to look at it and say, okay, well, now I understand that my life couldn't have gone any other way. And then also that a lot of times through trauma, we develop really beautiful skill sets. Like, and I'm not being like a proponent for trauma, but
I
I'm
hear
just saying
you.
like,
I hear you.
there's like some really beautiful things that become byproducts of who we are
Yeah,
as individuals that allows us to be more expansive. And like you were talking about, have that agency, cultivate more joy and more inner peace through those very tough lived experiences.
absolutely. And really, you're talking about, Krista, the key to happiness is noting that the things that we've experienced have created within us possibly this capacity to be very empathetic and to be very, really sensitive and be able to feel into the energy of people, places, and things, by using our
Yes.
intuition, then to now guide us towards certain things and away from others with more ease, by really listening to the wisdom of our body, of our intuition, and not using our mind to talk ourselves out of the things that we feel, really work for
Yes.
us. I think that's so key. I know for me, it's been so relieving to just trust myself and knowing as I look back, I always had this innate intuition. I don't think, I know I wasn't taught to listen to that. And now I do tell myself to listen. I encourage others, listen to yourself. But even if it doesn't make sense, that's okay. And life really wants to guide us in a more seamless and easy way, and to really notice your strengths and the powers that you have to, as a result of what you've lived.
I agree with that wholeheartedly. I felt the same way too. And the work that I do is like, it's only led in bringing people back into themselves, like coming
Yeah.
back to that internal guidance system. There was something that you said in the book that I thought that I'd like you to explain a little bit more for people who really don't understand astrology. And I'm not an expert either. So, like I have to go back and read additional things to make sure, because I have not studied this at all. But Chiron's mediated by Saturn and Uranus. And Uranus, I think, like I have a lot of Uranus in my family system. So like my family system creates a lot of upheaval, and like it's just always something's always going on in that.
Okay.
So it makes it difficult, in my chart in that area. But specifically with Chiron, you talk about this in the book, that it's mediated between Saturn and Uranus. And what would that actually mean? Like when you say that, what does that actually mean? And how can that be kind of difficult to navigate when you're working with your Chiron?
Good question. And Saturn and Uranus are planets that, and I come to this work, full disclosure, as a psychotherapist. I have a resource section of astrologers in the back of the book that I've
Mm-hmm.
really learned from and worked with. So this is my interpretation, is from a
Okay.
psychotherapy standpoint. And my understanding of Saturn has to do with boundaries. And sometimes those boundaries are, we need to set boundaries with others. And for others of us, we need to set some boundaries with ourselves, which are more loving, like maybe to put down working so late and so much, and maybe open to having more pleasure and connection, and really being self aware, self accountable is how I can think of Saturn as well. Like really taking personal responsibility for, if it's healing we need to do in order to show up differently in our world and be available to more of what we want. That's an
Yeah.
aspect of Saturn I think of. And then mediated, meaning like considering as well Uranus, this planet of what can be unexpected, what can be changed. And Chiron really invites us to make these positive and loving changes. It's not something to be afraid of. Like I think it's often portrayed like Saturn being this harsh planet, a taskmaster, and Uranus being kind of like you reference upheaval and things that might hurt us. And that's really not the case. When we look at, my belief is life loves us, the universe
Mm-hmm.
loves us. There's this loving way to start to know that change will happen, but that it's change that we really want to bring us to everything we want, and to invite in learning through more loving and kind experiences versus harsh, surprising ones. And that has to
Mm-hmm.
be a real internal shift within you
Mm-hmm.
to really ask for that. Hey, like I've been through some things in my family. There is this template, these patterns that were really jarring for me. And now I want to create change that's more easy, that's more gentle, that's more joyful. And I know we can do that because I've seen that evidence in my life, that things
Mm-hmm.
happen in a more loving way, in a more happy way. How do you feel about that?
I don't think I'm going to disagree with anything you say here, because like your book, I felt like it was so spot on about even just living through this experience. When you first come into contact with astrology, like there is some scariness, the negative aspects of it or the shadow aspects. And this is a great segue to my next question, because it lends to the idea of like our flaws and our shortcomings, and the flaws and shortcomings of other people, and our shadow sides and the other side, shadow sides of other people. And being able to like compassionately reconcile all of those things
Yes.
is huge, right?
Yes, you're totally hitting it on the mark. And it makes other people and things like this and experiences less fearful and scary. And it allows us to really start living from a place of, I'm responsible for me. and, not other people and how they're showing up or acting out. And we can choose to take some time away from someone should they be acting in manners that are hurtful, that are disturbing to us, that don't feel good, and know that it's just our responsibility to really keep loving and creating experiences in an environment where we can grow and feel safe emotionally, physically, financially, and ask. I do a lot of asking of the universe and of life to like show me and bring me the people that want to be around me, that love what I represent, that it's easy to ask for more
Mm.
ease and ask for more alignment. And then notice who starts texting you or calling or who you run into at the store, and give that some of your airtime. It's like, maybe these are some people and experiences meant for me. Like, I really want to bring down the fear factor in our lives and really maximize the love and the peace and the like really expanding into being all that we are as much as we can authentically, and feeling like safe to do that and happy to
Mm-hmm.
do that.
Yeah. I wonder what your thoughts are too when people like me, for instance, I experienced a lot of codependency in my
Yeah.
family, and even transitioning to that place where you feel empowered and you have agency, and ultimately we can only control for our environment and ourselves and what's in our inner world, right? That
Yeah.
reflects our outer world.
Yeah.
But do you have anything to say for people who have struggled with codependency and realizing that they can make that shift to, coming back into themselves and separating that? Because I think that's like a big thing for a lot of people all over the world. Not That was something big for me that I at some point I realized, like, I think, and also because we grow up and we're, younger siblings, and we're kids to parents who
Yeah.
make us feel like
Yeah.
we should that we should accept their authority and what they say, and like unlocking that is huge.
It is. It is. And really beautiful question. Codependency shows up in the placement of Chiron in the sign of Libra. And that doesn't mean if you are a Libra, this is your Chiron. Again, reminder, this is different. If
Yes.
Chiron is in the sign of Libra, it speaks to this vulnerability. And again, on a spectrum, vulnerability on the left, kind of lighter end, and core wounding in your sense of personal independence. And this is where people might have perceived you, or you might feel yourself like a chameleon to fit in. You might kind of change and shift some of how you show up to really avoid being criticized or ridiculed, and to fit in and be loved. And for you, the growth and the work is learning what you like. And instead of deferring so easily to others, be it in your romantic relationship or in friendships or at work, like really starting to learn, because you might not know. It's from a place of like, sure, it's okay, because that you've been so conditioned to go with the flow.
Yes.
The awakening and the healing and the growth is, do I really like this? How do I really want to spend my time? And I think it helps if you do have a trusted loved one that you can share, like, hey, I'm really trying to work on this codependency pattern, and can you help me? Like, when we plan to go to dinner, and I might usually be like, where do you want to go? And sure, that's fine. Like, maybe you can help me grow with, what are 3 places you would like to go, Krista? And because I think it helps to have somebody to really walk this walk and path with you, because there's
Mm-hmm.
some fear in upsetting people. And
Yeah.
that's real, to feel like you might upset your close relationships, and people being
Mm-hmm.
mad at you or making them uncomfortable can really feel fret with anxiety. and
Mm-hmm.
and to have somebody help you unravel this, so that even you can have a disagreement and somebody might have some emotion around it and feel differently, but it doesn't mean they don't like you. We can, and I think that can be hard to learn when we're used to people pleasing in the best sense of that. Really like seeing pleasing others as a way to source your needs being met. Because I think for a lot of people, that's how their needs were met, by being compliant, by being, like a yes person. And that might have worked when we were young to get needs met. But as an adult, it doesn't, as I hear you saying, and really wanting to be able to speak our truth. And I think that's a process to learn.
Yeah, it's a huge process. And I know so many people like struggle with this in different places. Having that safe space to practice it is huge, to be able to have somebody, if it is like the people pleasing is like a core wound or something that you struggle with, like feeling that tinge of disappointing them or like
Yeah.
upsetting them, that is so real. So I really appreciate you going after that and explaining it that way. I did also want to ask about, like, when we think about our journey with our just our core wounding, whatever that may be, and even just like trauma, across the spectrum.
Sure.
I was wondering, you know, sometimes we feel grief about this, right? Like
Yeah.
sometimes you feel grief about the things that you've experienced, and even things like maybe we self-inflict trauma to ourselves, like whatever the case
Absolutely.
may be.
Yeah.
I wondered what you had to say about trying to work with that grief in the healing process, and if it relates anywhere into this work, that of your book. Where do you see that sort of fitting in this process?
Absolutely. Another beautiful and insightful question, Krista. And so Chiron in the sign of Cancer speaks to this vulnerability and wounding by abandonment. And this might have been an abandonment where a caretaker literally left. A dad or mom started a new family and abandoned you, or it might be where a caretaker, a parent had an addiction, and that addiction, that substance was their primary attachment. And so you experience some real, neglect and abandonment, and having to source taking care of yourself. And that really has left you with grief, with this loss of being attended to and cared for. So healing from grief, I think, is something that we definitely all experience in life. When a person dies that we love, or a beloved pet, or something changes, and it's something that we really didn't want to change, that we're in a grief process. And grief is a natural part of life. And I see healing grief, again, very compassionately and through this lens of empathy and understanding. And I think in our culture in America, there's this push to like get over it really quickly. Whereas other cultures, I think, honor grief better and really have traditions and practices to allow an amount of time for after the death of someone to really take time to be together and
Mm-hmm.
celebrate that person's life. So I encourage you to honor your grief in in the way it shows up for you. And even in the chapter, Chiron and Cancer, I correlate the stages of grief that were articulated by Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and David
Mm-hmm.
Kessler, which has been taught in therapy and medicine for since I think the early 70s, that these stages that we all know about: denial, anger, depression, acceptance, and I correlate them with our chakra system. And it's a paradigm, if you read that or listen to it on the audio, to really work with the areas of your body that might be feeling grief as it works its way through you. And I just saw that as a way to slow down uh,
Mm-hmm.
the pressure or the feeling within us, even like, I just want to get beyond this. I just want to get over this and really allow the natural passing of grief through you, so that you can actually get to the stage, the higher stage of making meaning, where you can weave this experience into the narrative of your life and come to a place of like, okay, it's different. And like, this is helping me grow. And, it's a beautiful way, I think, to integrate grief
Mm-hmm.
and loss versus feel so battered by it.
Yeah. Oh man, I love the idea of weaving in the narrative, because I just feel like I'm an alchemist to my core, and it's like
Yeah.
I don't ever want to discard anything. I feel like it's all very useful and can teach us so much about ourselves. And like, to your point earlier, like, we live in a world that is constantly pulling us outside of ourselves, where even going on the journey of personal development is such a beautiful journey to discover who you really are. And I
Yes.
think the grief component, you're absolutely right as well, especially in the Western world, especially here in the US. Like, there is just this cultural paradigm of like, get through everything as fast as you can. Like,
Right.
there's no slow anything here. And to slow down, and to slow down within yourself, and to give yourself the space to process. I feel like especially in America, is such a radical experience to have because everyone wants you to move fast here about absolutely everything.
And that ties back into, you mentioned earlier, Krista, taking personal responsibility. And a way that can show up with grief is to really give yourself permission to take the time.
Yes.
And really carve that out, however that looks, be it time off from work, be it time just away with loved ones that you feel like you can just be in your feelings with, to really give yourself permission to honor the process of transformation that grief brings to our lives.
Yeah. Well, I want to kind of deep dive a little bit more into the compassion and the tolerance and the self-acceptance, because for me, this was huge on my journey. I found it through Buddhism, like coming into contact with self-compassion for the first time when I went on my journey through Buddhism, and that was absolutely life-changing. And in some ways, it was like the key and the antidote to all of the healing work. Like I could intellectualize my healing, and I could do talk therapy and somatic therapy. But like you said, there would be times where it would ping again and I would be back in it and all of these things, and allowing myself to cultivate self-compassion for myself and self-forgiveness too, because I think a lot of us along our healing journey, we're beating ourselves up as well. Like, we're like, why am I not over this already? Like, why is this still bothering me? And trying to even understand why it still bothers you, you have to have a lot of compassion around that. So for you, how do you see compassion, empathy, tolerance, acceptance? How do you see those and self-forgiveness as really antidotes to healing our wounding?
It really, all of those things, compassion, empathy, forgiveness, allowance, bring in this buffer of like pausing and really allowing ourselves to view ourselves through the lens of our total lived experience up to this moment, and understanding that you really make sense. Even if you've been engaging in patterns that are self-sabotaging and causing you undesirable experiences now, those are things that you learned, and you can learn differently to show up more lovingly and kindly towards yourself and with others by really forgiving and empathizing to your experience. I think fear has driven a lot of people's lives when we've experienced traumas as well. And it's about really getting to a place where I want love and compassion and empathy to be the dominant paradigms and lens that I look at myself, the world, and others through, rather than fear, because it really causes our bodies to, like, I feel it as I even say, to really like let go of that hypervigilance and that kind of tightness.
Like overprotecting.
Like our shoulders up and like we're always on hyper alert, that causes physical ailments as well, because adrenaline's being released into our bodies when we're in that hypervigilance and hyperarousal. And that was necessary in some of our homes where, again, there was trauma that was experienced. Yet as adults, we can learn to create a safer home environment, financial environment, relational environment. And it's through forgiving ourselves for maybe how we hurt ourselves through addiction or unhealthy relationships, and learning that was
all
part
the coping mechanisms.
As you were saying, Chris, it's all been part of our path to get here. And my book, I hope, helps you really have some more clarity so that from here you can create more, architect a life that you want versus living by default, and by truly forgiving yourself first and foremost before you look at approaching forgiving others, to give yourself that empathy and compassion.
And just to give ourselves like so much grace, because
grace,
like I think it, for anyone that is doing this work of self-exploration and self-healing, like you have to give yourself so much grace, because it's like a steep learning curve, first of all, because you're trying to understand so many complex things. You're also trying to understand the mindset of other people who have wounded you. Then, like you said, as we get older, then we start to self-sabotage in response to the things we've learned or new things that we've taken on. that really get in the way of us living like an aligned and integrated life. And throughout that entire process, you have to have so much grace and self-compassion, because like you're the biggest advocate you have, right?
Yes.
Like
Yes.
you have to be your best friend through it all.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. And learning that some of us have needed to learn that we can trust ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
because sometimes people feel like they can't trust themselves. And so we defer our power to others to make
Yep.
decisions for us or guide us. And I really want to empower you to learn to trust yourself through doing some of the deeper work, if that's what you need, especially if you've experienced some relational trauma in your life, to really do that healing. I talk about that in a section of my book, because there is really a process where you have to learn that you can trust yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And because maybe in the past or now you're making some unhealthy decisions through, be it addiction, because that can be a big one, or relationships that are addictive, that aren't healthy, and you're left feeling vulnerable and wounded in ways that you were in your childhood, because we source patterns in our lives, and I call it our orbit. I see ourselves, Krista, as like little solar systems. Like we're a little planet, like you and I have attracted each other. We're orbiting a like
Here we
hearted.
are, just orbiting each
Yeah,
other today.
exactly. And that's no, we really want to have the best orbit that we can. And that takes some time looking at what needs to be healed within us and taking that time. And that's why I wrote my book as well, to help us do that.
And it does take time. I mean, none of this is happening in a short period of time either. I think that's key part is that I feel like being able to have stamina in your healing journey is also like a practice in self-love, because you will need it over time. This what you last said there too is just like, you're just setting me up to ask you all these questions. But
Yeah.
I did also want to talk about, from your perspective, the delineation that happens of like what happens to us relationally to us when we're young, that creates wounds with other people. And then like, I think a lot of us do take an opposition, like we throw out the baby in the bathwater in opposition of what happened to us with other people when we were young. But then there's this like line where we become self-accountable adults and we're making decisions from our own consciousness. And so when that's a complicated thing to look at in the healing journey, because you're doing it in parallel. So what I'm asking is like, what is the difference between like trying to heal the old stuff versus the new stuff?
I love this question because it's very complex. And I think the answer is found in it's ours, that we are wounded in the context of relationships, and we heal in the context of relationships. And I think when
I
something
love that.
yeah, thank you. I think when something happens that it's feeling like this kind of confusing mix of what's happening here, it's important to just time out and take a pause to be with yourself. And like, this was created at the core of it to help both people heal, whoever's involved heal. And we can just be aware of our own end of that sometimes the person wants to heal with us, and that's awesome when it happens, because you can really slow things down and ask questions like, hey, that really triggered me. It reminds me of something that I grew up with. Does this remind you of anything? And really have like an open-hearted talk, and you can have those aha moments like, oh, okay, this is what's happening. And that really speaks to Chiron. Our Chiron placements, when we're triggered, a trigger is an unhealed energetic attachment. I talk about that in my book, where it's kind of something dormant, and somebody says something or does something, like maybe they're late. Someone's late to dinner, and that you have like a kind of out of proportion reaction to it, because when you grew up, maybe a parent was always late or never came home because they were out at the bar or having an affair. And so for you, when someone doesn't show up, you feel really disrespected, or you might feel abandoned. And so our reaction to something seemingly small could be disproportionate because of this unhealed experience growing up, where people didn't show up for us, a caretaker didn't show up, and that was never healed. the caretaker didn't take responsibility and say, I'm sorry, and change their pattern. They just kept doing it. So in our adult lives, and this is just an example, this is still something that really rubs us the wrong way. And I think true freedom can come where we understand, okay, that's something that I experienced that was really painful for me. This person today in my adult life, they're not my father, they're not my mother, they don't know that they're not actively trying to hurt me in this way, and to really step back. And this is coming up for my healing. When these triggers come up, it's actually good news. It's like life wants to help us heal this part of
Mm-hmm.
ourselves, so we're not feeling so uh like unstable and activated by other people, places, and things. It can help to really first and foremost like attend to that part of ourselves. I'm just so sorry you went through that as a child and as an adult. I'm just so sorry you went through that, and this is still affecting you. Like, and really kind of speaking to yourself. And hopefully with that person, you can share, hey, like, I experienced this growing up. When you were late, I felt, X, Y, and Z. And then allow the other person, to say their part. And as we have these conversations with ourselves and others, it can heal us. How does that
Yeah.
land with you?
Yeah, I think that's spot on. And I love that. And I also like that you talked about the physicality of the reaction that we have that can sometimes be outsized when we do get triggered. And you're
Yeah.
just like, you're like, what is going on here? Like, why am I getting so upset about this thing?
Yeah.
And then it's interesting to understand those like deep connections. And then also be able to take, an empowered approach of at least like owning the because the reaction is ours, right? Whether it's
Right.
with the person or not, that who triggered it, that doesn't really matter. It's like our reaction to it is a signpost. It's a signal that like something here needs to be addressed, and having the courage and being empowered to relationally work it out with someone is beautiful. But then also to go back internally and see like, where do I need more healing from this thing?
Yeah.
I feel like that's everything.
Right. Because sometimes the other person can meet us there in that space, and sometimes they can't. And you don't
Yes.
want your healing to be determined by if someone else can be accountable or not. Because that, again, you're
1,000%.
giving away your power to someone else. And in those situations, that for me, the greatest tool is to really take time. Lisa, I'm just so sorry you went through that. And feel it. Like, what do you need? What do you need to know is true about you? And often it's
Hmm.
something around, you know what, you're absolutely valuable and worthy, and this doesn't affect at all who you are. And really, and that's like the strong legs we can stand on. And it helps us over time of practicing that, being kind of like, people can be who they are and we can still be okay. And that's really emotional freedom, that we can
Yes.
still be happy, we can still be healthy, and it's not contingent so much anymore upon what others are doing or not doing. And that allows us to, I think, just be so much more happy in our world and in our lives, to really like know that no matter what, I can unconditionally love myself. And that's what unconditional love is, regardless of this condition of someone else or something else. Like, I can still find my joy and happiness and approve of myself because it's not reflected in other people's actions
Hmm.
or inaction.
Yeah, which is such a huge like cultural and like a human experience, because we grow up learning that our identity and our happiness is tied to other people, and then we have to like unlearn that as an adult. I
Right.
think one of the biggest like spiritual experiences that was so helpful was learning the four agreements of like
Oh, I
not
love
taking
Don Miguel. Yes, the four
yeah,
agreements. It's
yeah,
on my
not taking
nightstand
things
still. Yes.
not taking things
Oh,
personal is everything in this work, because it does allow you, I would say it allows you the road or like the runway to keep moving forward, because that, I feel like that conditioning in our mind that takes us back to like, what will people think of me, or like, and when you change, it's such a disorienting process for other people, because
right.
you're changing yourself to be healthy, which
Yeah.
means you're inherently breaking bad patterns in relational
Right.
circumstances.
Agreements, so to speak, that were unspoken. And so,
Exactly.
yeah, and I think often that brings up such a good point, Krista, is that I think sometimes when we make these wonderful personal changes and we're celebrating ourselves and want to celebrate that with others, they might be like, what? Who? And so just like it took us some time to have that growth, if we can have grace with others to allow them and to even share. Like, I know I'm changing up the pattern here with you or with things, but it's actually who I've always wanted to be. And I'm still here. I just might be showing up slightly differently, and you're still just as important to me, because I think people might sometimes be afraid, like, are we still important to you? And you can affirm that part as you're really embodying the growth and personal development that is making you more authentic.
Yeah. And I think that, the inverse of what other people feel and why it's so important to have that grace is because even though maybe they don't have self-awareness or they even understand why you're wanting to change those patterns, I think unconsciously it illuminates something in them and they automatically can feel like, pressurized or, like unease about the change that is happening, even if they don't understand, like, the goal of somebody is to break out of this old conditioning and this old
Right.
patterning. You said something back there too about having unconditional love. I think the idea too that really helped me transform and transmute when we're talking about compassion and empathy to self is this idea of unconditional positive regard for self.
Yeah.
That was huge too. Like, I didn't even, and this is, I think, a psychological term that I don't know who came up with it, but you can have it for yourself, but you can also have it for other people. But that was huge in being able to, like, give myself the benefit of the doubt as well.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely, as well. And I would say first, if you can, start to really give ourselves the benefit of the doubt and pause. And sometime a part of that might be going back and apologizing. Hey, I'm really sorry
Yes.
I said that. Like, I'm big on personal responsibility. As
I
you,
love apologizing now.
yeah, it can really help just kind of
It
clean up.
helps diffuse. Yeah.
It does. And it can feel good to just, hey, I own that. That was me. I apologize. Like, it can just help things heal more quickly and have our relationships move along in happier ways that we want, more seamlessly.
I wanted to ask you also a question for the people who are really deep into astrology and love everything about the natal charts and follow it real closely in terms of the healing. I had this question for you and I wanted to see where you want to take it, but it's like looking at our astrology and our destiny, like taking a very, I would say, balanced view of it, understanding that, like, we can make choices from present moment awareness. But if we do have this blueprint that we created, toggling between both of those things in a very balanced way, how do you see us working with astrology, but also working with the present moment?
Well, I see, since we wrote our chart, we are the author. We can change anything and everything if it doesn't
Okay.
please us, or if we learn, if our life takes us to a place where we've been going in a direction and it's like, oh my gosh, like, I want to change the train tracks and go in this direction. I feel like I'm a big believer in our free will based upon our choices, and like really supporting ourselves to go in the direction that we want and being supported by others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that too. I think that's a great way to answer that. Okay, so we're getting close to the end here, and I wanted to give you some space if there's anything that you want to also talk about the book or anything that we didn't really get to hit on that might be important for the listening audience to know about this work and all. And I think you have a podcast as well. So anything else you want to say here about your work in the book?
Krista, your questions, your energy have been so thoughtful. I appreciate you. I'd love to have you on my podcast, All Things Therapy,
Oh,
in the
for sure. I'm
future.
there.
This year, yes. And today is my 8-year anniversary of doing my podcast, All Things
Oh.
Therapy. So I'm really delighted to share this important date for me with you and our
Mm.
audience. Thank you so much for your energy and presence. You're amazing.
Thank you.
You're
I
welcome.
appreciate that. I appreciate that. And so, okay, so as we wrap up, I always like to see, so where you have a lot of also services that people can work with you on. So I was going to give you some space as well to tell people, how they can connect with you and work with you if they're interested in doing any type of work like this. And I think you've got your own independent practice and stuff, but do you want to tell us about that real quick?
I do, absolutely. I am a licensed clinical social worker. I have been for over 25 years. I do therapy sessions by phone, FaceTime, and Zoom. So you can be anywhere. I would love to work with you if this conversation is resonating within any part of you. And we can incorporate the psychoastrology of Chiron, which is a word I trademarked to simply delineate where our personal psychology meets our natal astrology in Chiron. Again, bringing the therapeutic lens to this one placement in your astrological birth chart, because I know that by understanding this area of your mind, of your belief system, of your thoughts, you can really hone in the way you support yourself in your thinking through affirmations and behaviors to really show up in those ways. It can really help your life change and you just feel more solid in every way. And I'd love to work with you. My website is nolatherapy.com. It stands for New Orleans, Los Angeles Therapy.com. And that's also my Instagram, Nola Therapy, and my YouTube. And mention Krista and the show. And I'm happy to give you 50% off 45-minute session that's traditionally $190. So it'd be half of that for a first time session with new people for you to see if this feels good to you. And I'd love to offer that.
Beautiful. Well, thank you. That's so generous. And you just reminded me of a question I did want to ask you too. You do have specific affirmations for each Chiron and each individual sign. And I wanted to understand the you do talk about this in the book, so this is more for the listening audience, but like, why is it important for us to ascribe affirmations when we're doing this healing work, but specifically with the Chiron placement in our natal chart?
Great question. And affirmations bridge where we are and where we want to go. It's like this invisible bridge. We want things for ourselves. We want to have X, Y, and Z, but it's like this gap between where and who we are in that spot. And affirmations are one of the tools that can bridge us getting there, because affirmations work in the area of our thought, the thought realm area, and our repetitive thoughts create our beliefs, and the beliefs that we believe create the actions that we're taking or not taking each day. And that becomes the lives that we're living. And so an affirmation really needs to be authentic. And so I offer several affirmations for every placement of Chiron. And it's important to baby step those if they don't feel authentic. Like if it's not authentic for you right now to say and believe, I am lovable, you want to make that affirmation be first and foremost, I want to believe that I'm lovable. I want to see that I'm lovable. I want to feel what that means to be lovable. And that would be your affirmation. Like, show me that I'm lovable. And like, once you start to have experiences that help you, really feel, okay, maybe I'm lovable, show me more of that. That's how how affirmations actually work, is to curate them and modify them to be something that gets us to where we want to be authentically. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh. I love that gentle nuance. That is so beautiful. Thank you for explaining it
You're
that way.
welcome.
That's so beautiful.
You're welcome. And even
Because
our words.
I know people will be like, I say this affirmation, but it doesn't feel right to me. And you're so right that it's like, it's baby steps. It's a bridge, and it's baby steps across that bridge. So I love that you did that, Lisa. That's beautiful.
And even our words. I've been reading a lot. I'm sure you know Louise Hay, who like Louise Hay, a founding mother of really affirming ourselves and looking at the area. Charles Hannell, Ernest Holmes are these early thought leaders, and they talk about the importance of our language, of our words, and they talk about spelling. Spelling word. It's called spelling because we cast spells with our words. And something Louise Hay and her work has helped me with, the thoughts we think, the words we speak, and to bring that all into alignment will make things happen fast for us that we want. It doesn't have to take a lot of time. When we really start to understand the impact and power of our language and our thoughts, things can happen really fast in good ways.
Yeah, and creating those new neural pathways with that really
Yes.
intentional language is a huge, huge thing.
Yeah.
You're so spot on about that.
So I learned that from Louise Hay and Ernest Holmes and Charles Hennell. So I just want to offer that in concluding.
Awesome. I do end in gratitude. So I always want to check in with my guests and figure out what 3 things they're grateful for, like in this moment, in this week, anything sort of that's rolling around your heart chakra or any of your chakras at this point.
Yes, I am so happy and grateful for life, for today, for this time with you, for meeting you and having this conversation, for the people that are watching, listening. I'm just so happy and grateful to be able to be here and speak these truths and affect positive change within people's lives. It makes me so happy.
Well, I'm grateful for you in this book. I think I was very curious when I understood what my Chiron placement, which is in Taurus, I really wanted to understand. I've actually been looking for a specialist. And of course, your agent connected us, I think, through just a whole host of synchronicities.
Yeah.
And I'm grateful that you did this work. And I'm also grateful that your work is really deeply rooted in the idea of agency and empowered mindset, because I think that's everything when you're doing healing work. I feel like it helps expedite, our growth process in such a beautiful way that is really supported. So I will put your link to the book so that people can go buy it. I think it's a beautiful, beautiful book that allows us better understanding of ourselves to unlock the things that get in the way of us, living authentically and aligned. So thank you so much for writing this book.
You are so welcome.
This podcast was written, directed, and produced by me, your host, Krista Ziomara, in alignment with Light Casting. Music curated and created by Mr. Pixie. You can find I'm Awake Now What on all social media channels by searching IANW Podcast. Head over to your favorite podcast app and subscribe, download, rate, and review. Come back every Sunday to partake in a new and enlightening conversation. May you be filled with love and light until we meet again.